Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss 1978's Superman the Movie, directed by Richard Donner and starring Christopher Reeve, is our pal from All Yeah Comics Skokie, returning guest, sweet Bernie Gersmeyer. Welcome back.
Evening, Anthony. I'm super excited to talk about this tonight.
As am I. What new conversation could we possibly have about a movie like 1978 Superman, which has been discussed endlessly? What new is there to say?
Yeah, and I think, we're coming up close to 50 years, man. Like it's pretty incredible when you look at this movie, how it has lasted the test of time. It's a great film.
It really is, and I'm not going to bury the lead here. I've watched it a number of times across my life, as I'm sure most Superman fans have, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, and I will just reiterate for the record, I've never disliked the movie. I have always had and expressed respect and admiration for and enjoyment of the movie. At the same time, and I've talked about this, it never imprinted upon me as strongly as I know it did for other folks. And I've always been a little envious. I always wish that I kind of had that experience. And I have to tell you, and to answer the question I posed to you, I actually do have some new things to say because I don't want to be overly dramatic. I've kind of seen the light with this movie. This was far and away the most I have enjoyed this movie. And I think whatever hurdles or roadblocks had been there keeping me from enjoying this fully were just knocked down in this viewing. And it's kind of amazing to be 4+ years into this podcast, almost 200 episodes, and 32 years into this fan journey, and still having an experience like this where I can kind of come away with a fresh perspective on something like this. So, I couldn't be more excited to compare notes, and I think this will be a really special discussion. I'm excited.
Well, and that's how if you remember, that's how I came around on Man of Steel. I originally saw Man of Steel. It was at 2013, right? And I was not in. And then it took a long time. It took 10 solid years and a number of rewatches to go, this is an excellent telling of this story. And sometimes it also just takes different perspectives, different seasons of life, different things you look at, or maybe I think we're seasoned as far as the research we've done to now go, that makes more sense now.
I think there were 3 things that really changed the way I looked at this. Number one, I very recently saw the Superman Christopher Reeve documentary, and it was so powerful and so moving.
Yeah.
And when I was watching it this time around, I was dialed into his performance in a way that I don't think I ever was before. And there were moments where I saw the internal struggle, the humanity, the emotion on display in a way that wasn't necessarily written on the page, but that he brought forth. And so I was just watching Christopher Reeve more closely, I think, than I ever have before. So that's number one. Number two, I reached out to the lapsed Catholic within me, and that, and the two of us walked down this road together, and the Jesus allegory kind of hit in a little bit of a different way. But the third, most important, most special thing was I rewatched this last night, late at night, because it's the weekend and we let our son stay up a bit longer, a bit later, but that meant that my viewing got started later and later. And even after he went up to bed and I started the movie, he was still not asleep. My wife was up there with him, but he was still knocking around. And then around the time that baby Kal-El's rocket left Krypton, he came downstairs. And it's like 12:30 at this point, and the kid was still up. And he grabbed a sticker or something, and he was starting to go back upstairs. And rationally, I was saying to myself, okay, let him go upstairs. Maybe he'll go to sleep. But I just had something came over me. And not a higher power, still lapsed Catholic, but something came over me. And I was like, hey, buddy, do you want to sit and watch this with me? And he was like, sure. And he came, and he's 5 years old. He came, he sat next to me on the couch. Now, he conked out by the time Jor-El appeared in the fortress, but essentially he watched the whole Smallville sequence with me.
Ugh.
And just to have him next to me And
with Pa Kent.
Yeah, so I'm glad he was not traumatized by that.
No, yeah.
Which I'm glad. At the same
Yeah.
time, I was expecting maybe a little bit more. His dad just died. I was, I'm sitting there with him. I'm expecting a little something, but no, he was fine with that. But just when Clark is racing the train, like he loved that. And even before that, with the ship and the baby coming at him, lifting the truck and the red blanket wrapped around him, and he's talking through the whole thing and he's asking me questions, and it was perfect. And I got to see a part of the movie through his eyes, and it was so special. And then again, he conked out by the time the fortress was erected. But it was really something. So those three things really, really kind of shifted my perspective with this. We have a question from one of our patrons that I'm going to pose to you first that is really going to tee us up, because I want to hear your experience with this movie. I mean, I've talked about Superman the movie before. People might be wondering, like, oh, haven't you covered this before? We have. But, the last time we did an episode on Superman the movie was episode 50 of this podcast. It was a really long time ago. And over these next 4 weeks, we're going to be going episode by episode. Each one is going to cover each of the 4 Christopher Reeve movies, because anytime we've talked about Superman 2, it's been in the context of comparing it to the Donner cut. So we're just now going to have a full-fledged discussion about the theatrical cut. And when we talked about Superman 3 and 4 in the past, it was in the context of that Superman Redeemed fan edit that combined the best of both. But crazy to say, we're this far in, we've never done a standalone episode on Superman 3 or a standalone episode on Superman 4. Yeah. And we're going to do it now because we're less than a year away from a new Superman iteration on screen. Yeah, so
it's great.
We're going to just go all out here for our last event of 2024. But here's the question. I pose this to you. This is from our pal Brian Dempsey, who always has great questions. Considering the special edition was the first version to come out on DVD and my age, he means, which version of the movie did you actually see first, or which made a stronger impression overall? When you decide to watch this movie, what's your go-to version?
Oh, so it's interesting. So I don't actually have the version that is my go-to version. And I know it was released. I haven't gotten it yet, but there was a release of this movie that I think was on NBC. So there's an extended TV version that has a few extra scenes that I just remember, like just as a little kid. Don't forget. So like I was born in 76. This came out in 78. The first time I really got to see it was when it aired on television, and they did it as like the big movie of the weekend. And they ran it. I think they ran it in 2 parts. I think they did it in it was a 2-hour viewing on Saturday, and then part 2 ran on Sunday. But that I believe was my knowledge of what I remember the most about this movie. But then, past that, it's always been the version that is not the one we watched, actually. So the Donner cut and some of the added stuff that's in there, I watched. There's a theatrical version is the one I was watching the most.
Interesting. Okay, so when you talk about the extended television cut, I'm gonna hold up the disc that I have. You're referring to this, the 3-hour version of the movie?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but you don't have this disc.
I don't have that disc.
So let me ask you: when's the last time you think you watched the extended 3-hour TV cut?
It was probably a recorded version on VHS that I think my mom and dad had, and I probably watched it in the 90s.
Okay. So I'm not giving you homework. You've done enough.
Yeah, I want to get it. Yeah.
But I would be fascinated to hear your perspective, because I had never seen this cut until they put out this Blu-ray, and I forget exactly when this was, 2017, 2018-ish. Yeah. Within the past few years, they finally made this available. This was, again, this 3-hour cut that the Salkinds put together. It was essentially, as Donner has described it, it was essentially the assembly cut of the movie, which had everything before it was trimmed. And they did this so that they could maximize its runtime on television and make more money, right? That's essentially what it was. Donner has criticized it as this cash grab. He's spoken out against it. And I never watched it until this disc came out, and I watched it. And I think any fan of Superman, specifically of this movie series, owes it to themselves to watch it at least once. You get more time in this world with these characters.
Yeah.
However, the reason why we didn't watch it for this episode, and the reason why it would never be my go-to, for me personally, right? Especially not having watched this as a kid or anything like that. It's to me, it's just kind of a perfect example of the importance of editing. Yeah. It just feels too long. Sequences go on. I mean, if you want to see Otis kind of walking through Grand Central for a few more minutes, that's the kind of stuff that's there. There's one, it's so fleeting. And this is the one thing I wish they had left in, where when Jimmy is at the dam and Superman saves him, he actually catches Jimmy and helps him get the shot with his camera for the paper.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, that was such a nice moment. I wish that had stayed. But that's the exception. So yeah, I would just be curious if you were to watch it now, if you would, maybe it would just take you back to being a kid and you would love it. But I don't know.
But it's not my go-to to answer Brian's question. It's my earliest recollection. But my go-to before we watched this one, because when this came out, I watched it and I was like, oh, cool. I mean, there's parts of this director's one that I love, like that. I really made notes going like, I love this sequence and how it added. And it's only, I think, maybe 12 minutes more than the original theatrical cut. I think something like that. Not even. I think it's about 8 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But what you're referring to is the special edition. And so this was the version of the movie that Donner oversaw and that was released in 2001. To answer Brian's question, I watched this for the first time when I was between 5 and 7 years old. I don't remember exactly when, but it was after I had already met Superman in The Death of Superman, and it was before we moved to our house when I was just about 8. So it was somewhere in that period of time. And I didn't even bother asking my parents because I know they won't remember. I suspect it must have been that we watched it on HBO or something like that. I don't think it was network television. I feel like it was probably HBO. Maybe we rented the VHS. It was one of those two things. Mm-hmm. But I do have a memory of watching it. I remember the next morning going into my parents' room and like talking to my dad about it as he was still asleep because I was excited about it. So going back to where I started, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, this made no impression on me. It did, but it still wasn't as foundational to my fandom as other things are that we've talked about. But I did have that early experience, almost certainly with the theatrical cut on HBO or on VHS. And then I bought the various quote unquote box sets that they've put out over the years on DVD, on Blu-ray, and now on 4K. And so for years now, what I have been watching is my go-to, my preferred version, and what Dick Donner prefers as well, which is that special edition, which, like I said, is about 8 minutes longer. Okay. And you were spot on there. There are 10 scenes or sequences that are inserted back into the movie. Some of them are really just a few seconds. Like there's a moment at the Daily Planet after Clark meets everyone where he sits down and Jimmy comes by and he's like, oh, I'll get you that towel, Mr. Clark. And he's like, Kent. And there's this back and forth about Clark Kent, Jimmy Olsen. It's a nice little bit of business. It doesn't, again, it's really just a few seconds. I feel like something like that. You wonder about some of these things that were cut. Right. Like why? Like what, how would that have taken a lot of extra film?
So that was really quick. There's a few seconds of the Hollywood sign falling during the earthquake. Yes. Right. So little things like that. I think the most significant ones though, and we'll talk about it as we get deeper into this, but there's that scene after Superman's first night, after he makes his debut, where he has this heart-to-heart with Jor-El. Just like you enjoyed yourself, right? I can't believe that was taken out. Similarly, there's this whole action sequence, the gauntlet scene before he gets into Lex's lair.
It's huge.
It's amazing. So I think those were the two most substantial pieces that were reinserted. And then there are also a pair of scenes with the Science Council on Krypton at the beginning.
I love that.
That add this whole other layer about everyone doubting Jor-El and about them investigating him right in these final moments before the planet explodes. So it really, I think, ties together that whole sequence. So again, for me, this is special edition, the way to go.
I'm with you. And it's very interesting because, so let me start with also to kind of bridge to Brian's question a little bit. Like the reason I love Superman stems so much from this version, because I feel like Christopher Reeve's Superman, there's just a purity about his performance as Superman that is so hopeful and kind and authentic that, I want to meet that Superman. Like that's the Superman I want to meet. And there is, I was going somewhere with this. There's a reason I brought that up. I'm sorry. I just lost
No,
it.
you're good. While that marinates, let me kind of ask a question that maybe you've already answered, but this is one of those big picture things. We talk about the personal side of all of this. It's always worth discussing because it's an essential piece of this puzzle when we talk about it.
Yeah.
Like I said, for me, had this early exposure to the movie, it didn't make the impression that I know it did on others. Yet, as I was reflecting on this, I've come back to this movie many times. Like, I just had this realization. I've been watching this movie my whole life.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we had the 40th anniversary, I went to my local Alamo Draft House and watched it on the big screen. And it was so funny, though, because I had only ever been watching the special edition for as long as I could really remember.
Right.
And then watching the theatrical cut, I'm like, what, they're missing stuff. What the hell?
You know, I watched the theatrical edition when it came out again. I took both my daughters and they each took a friend. And none of them had ever seen it. Like their friends had never seen it. And they all walked out like, that was such a great movie. I never knew that much about Superman. I really like Superman now. I'm like, that says a lot. And they were 13 and 17. They weren't little kids.
That's the thing. This movie holds up so much better than it has any right to, given the era that it was made, the technology, just everything going on behind the scenes with this production, how they were flying by the seat of their pants. Mm-hmm. They had multiple versions of a script that they were holding together. It's really astounding. And really, I have to tip my hat to Dick Donner and Christopher Reeve and everyone, but those two in particular, just for the amount of integrity that I think both of them brought. But the question I was going to circle back to with you is, for you, how foundational is this movie to your fandom? I mean, is this the sort of thing like you hold up as like, this to me is the epitome of Superman on screen? Does it hold that space for you?
Goodness.
No pressure.
Man. I'd say the answer, I would say that the epitome of Superman. Well, if we're talking about on screen, I'm close to saying yes. I think there are aspects of Smallville and Man of Steel that is a conglomerate, but honestly, I think I would say it's 75% Superman the movie, and then another 25% of other things that I've taken from other media that I go, yeah, that kind of finishes the picture. But there's something to, if I have a hard time not connecting the comics and my love for the comics to the movie. Like when I see Christopher Reeve, I see Kurt Swan's art. Like it's almost like that was one of the reasons why they went, oh, this guy looks like, there's times that he stands there and I swear he was drawn. Like Christopher Reeve looks drawn. And it's incredible to me. And that's just good direction.
No, absolutely. I think that I think I've always felt this to some degree or another, but now more so than ever, where I look at this and it's so iconic, and I feel like its presentation of each piece of the story, it's so elemental, it's so efficient in its storytelling. It's, to me, kind of, it does set the standard, and it does, even though they make major changes to the comics at the time. You talk about the visual representation of Krypton, for example. They created a whole new language for that and a whole new elevated role for Jor-El as more of this omniscient godlike being.
Yes.
Even something like Smallville, this project was the one that established Smallville as being in Kansas. And at this point in the comics, and we talked about all the Superboy stuff, they were essentially living in town and manning the general store. I mean, this really brought us back to the farm. And that's now been the default setting when we talk about Smallville. Nevertheless, just in terms of the spirit of the character and the visual look, it was the comics brought to life. And so I think having that is essential in this larger mythology. And for people who look at Christopher Reeve as their number one, I cannot begrudge them that. I guess where I've butted up against other aspects of the fandom in the past is,
I know what you're going to say,
just that there's room for other interpretations. And I don't want to be a broken record. I understand that this isn't even just a Snyder thing. I'm just talking generally speaking.
No, sure.
I know that not everyone who dislikes something else, I know it's not just because it's not the Christopher Reeve thing. I understand that. But when there have been instances where people have compared other things, unfavorably to this, or even beyond that, some who have said not just that Christopher Reeve is their favorite, but that no one will ever do it better. I can't accept that, because to me, it's like, well, then what are we doing here? I mean, I feel like there always has to be at least the chance, right?
Yeah.
And also, it doesn't need to be a matter of better or worse. It could just be different. So I think that's what I've had a little bit of resistance to when we talk about the larger fandom and the larger discussion around this. Respect, admiration, enjoyment, number one, all fine, but not to the exclusion of other interpretations or other future takes. That's my thing. So
2 quick things. First of all, I think it's interesting because this is in 78, originally written in 77. If you look at the comics of the time, Superman was not doing great. Like the comics of the 70s, Neil Adams really helped in the Bronze Age, start kicking off the Bronze Age in 71, and that made a big difference. But I do believe that the script, Tom Mankiewicz, who edited the heck out of Mario Puzo's original 500-page script, I think it was very visionary, dude. I think there were aspects of Superman that it's like they wanted the comics to then be. It's what they didn't see in comics and went, this is where we should go now. And the other side thing that I've always said, and I will stand by this, is that as much as I love Christopher Reeve's Superman, he's not my favorite Clark Kent. His young version and his learning version, I really appreciate when Jeff East does that. I've never been a fan of the bumbling Clark Kent. I love, you're going to think I'm nuts, I feel that the best Clark Kents to me are a conglomeration of Dean Cain and Tyler Hoechlin. I think there is strength to be had in Clark Kent, but who he is and how he stands makes the secret identity. But the biggest piece of acting that Christopher Reeve does in Superman the movie is when he almost wants to tell Lois, and the superb acting of how he just changes his slouch and his voice. It's beautiful, but it's not my favorite Clark Kent.
So this is perfect. And this is a movie. I know people know this. We don't have to go in a linear fashion. We can jump around. We're already in it. This is not table setting. We're in it. We're talking about it. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because this was when I said a few things shifted my perspective, and one of them was really watching this performance. I am with you overall, right? I do child of the post-crisis era. Clark is who I am. Superman is what I can do. What we saw on Lois and Clark and the comics of the time. And even now with Superman and Lois, where, you really get the sense Clark, kind of dorky Clark, is who he is. And then he puts on a little bit of a bravado when he's Superman. Right. Or what I always say, Clark on the farm, that's the guy. And then both of the other two identities, a little bit of a disguise. Maybe this is a hot take. I want to get your reaction to this, and audience, you reach out as well. And this is one of my new takes on this that I was shocked that I felt this way. I think we collectively, the larger fandom and myself personally, I think we have slightly exaggerated just how bumbling the Christopher Reeve Clark Kent is. Because I was really watching him in this. Because I've said, check the tape. I know I said this so many times. Oh, he's tripping all over himself. There are a few instances when he first meets the Daily Planet crew and Perry gives him the bottle to open and he pretends he can't open it. He's struggling, right? And then Lois opens it, and then, she loosens it and then it sprays all over him. There's that. There's when he gets stuck in the revolving door. There's when he's following Lois to the ladies' room and he almost goes in and she closes the door and it gets stuck. Yeah. Unless I'm mistaken, and we're really just focusing on this movie, that's largely it in terms of the true bumbling. Most of the rest of it is him trying to friggin' talk to people. Most of it is him just saying, hello, good night, hey, how's Jim Olsen? It's just him trying to engage with people, and they're ignoring him.
Don't forget, it's Midwest versus Metropolitan.
Yeah.
He's just being kind. And even just saying swell, like that kind of stuff. Now, I guess, don't forget, I'm not referring to Superman the movie. I'm referring to all 4 movies.
Okay.
So like it gets progressively worse through the movies as far as the bumbling a little bit for me. And that's why I feel that way. But I'm with you. I totally see it. Yeah. It's only a little bit, but then he's kind and people are just kind of jerks.
Now, is this a departure? I mean, it is interesting. This take on Clark is largely an outlier, especially when we're talking about the realm of other media. And look, every week I talk about an episode of the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series. That Clark was a far cry from that. And I've heard from a lot of Adventures of Superman fans who were not at all taken with this very mild-mannered, occasionally bumbling iteration of Clark. Hey, the George Reeves Clark, he was assertive, he was impatient, he got frustrated, he punched people out. It was he was
sarcastic. Yeah, he was very sarcastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different version of the character. So yes, this is a departure. I think for this version, it worked. One thing I've said before, and even with my enhanced appreciation, I still stand by this statement. I look at this movie series, to me, this is the story, I know I've said this before, a god living among men, as opposed to a man with the powers of a god. And I think that's an important distinction. And through that lens, I think this take on Clark works. It's entertaining. And depending on if this were a weekly series, no, I don't think this would really work. But for this movie where you're only spending so much time with Clark, I think it works. I think it works quite well. And funny enough, having now watched the entire Superboy series, if you really want to see a really nerdy, bumbling Clark, watch season 2 of that show.
Yeah.
Now, here's my question. And this might be me reading too much into it or giving Christopher Reeve and the filmmakers too much benefit of the doubt. But I don't know how much of the bumbling shtick in this first movie, like when he is following Lois inadvertently into the bathroom, like how much of that do you think truly is an act versus maybe a little bit of that goofiness? The notion that he could be uncomfortable around a woman would not be shocking to me, especially since dude just spent 12 years in an ice palace. He's probably not very experienced. So how much, because I think it's easy to just say it's all an act, and maybe it is, and that's it. But
I know. And the funny thing is, I've never thought it was an act. I've never thought the bumbling was an act or a part of his secret identity. I think it was just an interpretation of who Clark Kent is. And that's the part that I don't love. It's not that I've never thought it was, he's putting on a persona. I've never loved the interpretation that Clark Kent is fully that way.
Oh, interesting. I feel like that's kind of I feel like people would be surprised by that. No?
About my reaction?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think, my read has never been he's trying to be bumbling.
Oh, that's always been my read on it. I always took it as this act that he was putting on. Interesting.
My read is they played up the country bumpkin too much. And that he just wasn't metropolitan. He was just a little bit too goofy and didn't get, he wasn't worldly enough to live in the big city.
Yeah. All right. I want to kind of stay on this thread. There's a couple more aspects of this and a involved listener question that I want to get to. You mentioned before Jeff East, who plays the young Clark Kent, the Clark Kent that we see in Smallville when he's of high school age. And famously or infamously, Jeff East performed that role, and then unbeknownst to him, his voice was dubbed over with Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
I guess, let me ask you this. The choice to redo the voice with that of Christopher Reeve, how do you feel about that? And then hand in hand with that, and this is not a knock on Jeff East at all. I liked him a lot in this. At the same time, though, do you think the movie would have been better served by having Christopher Reeve play 18-year-old Clark as well?
I never thought of that. First of all, I don't know what Jeff East's original voice sounds like. So I don't know whether the decision was a combination of they didn't like his voice depiction, or it was, let's create continuity so we kind of hear what Chris would sound young. I think I think in our heads logically it makes sense to have Chris play 18-year-old. He's 6'3". put him next to Glenn Ford.
True.
Like, if you have Glenn Ford, who's in the latter half of his career, he's probably 5'9", 5'10" at that point. Chris would be towering over his dad at 18.
No, that's true. I guess I think about it though. Christopher Reeve, he was so young, he was in mid-20s when he was doing this.
Yeah.
And we've had precedent, right, for 10 years on television with someone that age playing an even younger version.
I know. And I just think that, I don't know. I think it would be a good idea, but I think I just wonder what it would look like. I wonder if they looked at it and went, no, this is not going to work. Because don't forget, they're taking a lot longer to make movies then than they did now. They had the time to go, oh, wait a second, this is not going to work.
Yeah, and again, I more pose the question. I don't know that I feel so strongly about it because in terms of arguments for different actors, it does, between different actors and just the amount of time that Clark spends at the Fortress, it really helps account for how nobody recognizes him.
Yes.
So there is that. And it does give you that moment of reveal when the Fortress tutelage has concluded and we go through the eye of the Jor-El face and Christopher Reeve is there. It's like, boom, this is the guy. He has arrived. So I think there is value. I think there are arguments for that. I guess though, on the other side, I wonder, I don't know, how do I put this? I think one of the things I've always struggled with a little bit with this movie, less so now, but I think one of the things I've always struggled with a little bit is what is Clark's arc in this movie? And we'll talk more about it, especially when we get to the climax. And yes, we'll touch upon how the mechanics of this time travel work and all of that. But
that's a whole nother thing. Yeah.
But this moment that Clark has with Martha at the gravesite of Jonathan, this famous moment, all the things I can do, all those powers, and I couldn't save him. And those words echo in his mind at the climax of the movie when he's about to go back in time and he's reminded of the words of Jor-El, you are forbidden to interfere with the course of human history. And you really do kind of have that strong connection there. And I suppose it works and plays well enough just the way it is. But I wonder, had it been the person we've spent the most time with as Superman, if we had him have that moment at the gravesite and then kind of tie it together at the end. Again, the answer might be they did it perfectly right and the way that they should, but it was just something that I was thinking about. If nothing else, though, I think we could have done without the dubbing of the voice. I think unless there was something in the, in the vocal performance that was like, oh my God, this doesn't work. I think we would have been okay. And we could have had that Jeff East performance intact. But there was just this third option that I was kicking around in my head of like, oh yeah, like that would have been interesting. That's all.
Now, just to be clear too, like even from as long as I first watched this movie when I was a kid, I did not learn about the Christopher Reeve dub until like the late 2000s. So for the longest time, I thought that was Jeff East's voice.
Same.
And I went, oh, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. But I wouldn't have pegged it to be Chris Reeve's voice either. Because it doesn't really sound like Reeve's voice. I
agree. So, and we'll still circle back. We'll talk about Krypton. But while we're talking about, I think, to me, the heart of this movie, the main character and the journey that he goes on. So we have a great question or pair of questions from one of our most dedicated audience members and patrons, Tim Bruns. So, and this also actually ties back to our recent run of Smallville episodes. I'm excited for us to tackle this. Okay. Tim says, on the subject of Clark becoming Superman, you've consistently voiced a preference for the trials of Smallville over the 12-year-long Fortress training or programming in Superman the movie. Now, I think there's an argument to be made that A, Tom Welling probably spent about as much time hanging around in the Smallville Medical Center as Christopher Reeve did in the Fortress. We have a good laugh about that. And that B, Welling's Clark was way more programmed / mind controlled by the octagonal disc and or the Kawachi caves than Reeve ever was by the Fortress crystals. That said, I appreciate the larger point that, on a hero's journey, the challenges that a character struggles with in his day-to-day life could be seen as more organically formative than being spoon-fed lessons in an ice palace. So this first part, we haven't gotten to the question yet, but I appreciate that, and it's humorous. I would,
Okay.
here's what I always have to defend Smallville. Yes, in those specific instances where he's downloaded with the Kryptonian language or Jor-El outright possesses him and has him operate as Kal-El at the start of season 4. Yes, he has been reprogrammed in those instances, but those are very discrete units of time as opposed to 12 years at the Fortress. Though, and I'm going to sort this out as we talk about it, maybe I've been a little bit unfair in referring to the 12-year tutelage as programming, but we'll get back to that. Returning to Tim's question here, he says, question number 1, after studying this character across time and media, would you say that you're able to appreciate Fortress training as a viable and equally valid way to become Superman as compared to the Smallville School of Hard Knocks? That's the first question. Would you like to tackle that first? Or do you want to let that marinate?
Go to the second one. I got to marinate that one for a second.
Okay. So question number 2, Tim says, Tom Welling's journey of self-discovery was rough, and his Jor-El often didn't make things any easier. Brando's Jor-El was significantly more benevolent, and I would argue, used the Fortress to try to give his son what time and a planet-shattering blast had robbed them both of, a relationship. I know that if I had to make a Hail Mary pass across the stars to save my child's life, I'd want to make that life as easy as I could for him. I just want to talk to him and tell him everything. I wouldn't want him to have to learn things the hard way. I'd want him to know who he was and that he was loved always. And so maybe Smallville's take on Clark's growth to supermanhood is a great hero's journey. But from the standpoint of a parent, can you imagine that it's what any father would want for his son? Do you want to tackle that? Now, in fairness, I've had these for a few days. You have not had them. I'm just bringing them on you. So I don't mind going first, but I'm happy to have you go first.
All right. Let me get some stuff out of my head before I forget it. So there's so many different sides of those questions that are really, really important to think about. So let's start with the fact that it was 12 years in the Fortress.
Yeah.
I was kind of, I don't want to say annoyed, but I would say I was watching that scene where it's just constant like facts and talking. It seemed like it would be, that'd be a long 12 years to me. Like watching what we saw in the movie and what he's getting, I guess, taught by Jor-El. That's a long time. When he says, in this last year, we talk about the human heart. I'm like, what could you possibly talk about for a year? Like so I guess there's just, I don't know whether that was a script edit where they needed to figure out a way to go from Jeff East to Christopher Reeve. Like, okay, we got to make it look like this guy's 12 years older. I would not sacrifice the time, and you're going to correct me possibly on this, but I would much rather have Jonathan Kent, John Schneider, helping Clark learn than Jor-El.
Yeah.
I would rather know a father's love that way, but we don't really know. It's the absence of the possibility. We don't know in the Christopher Reeve universe how close they really get in those 12 years. What we do know is in Superman 2, when the Fortress is destroyed and it's burnt to a crisp and he can't talk to his father anymore, his scream for his father, that warrants the fact that he was very close to that Jor-El. So I think that's the hard thing for me. It's like, he's definitely close to Jor-El. He needs his father, but we don't see that. It's like 4 minutes in the movie.
Now, in fairness, presumably the time is passing differently than we would think of a year, right? Because otherwise that would feel like an endless slog, I feel like. Now,
right.
To tackle Brian's second question first, and we got into this when we went through Smallville, I think that the tension that was present between Clark and Jor-El, it served that particular series and that telling, right? They wanted to tie into this idea of quote unquote teenage rebellion, of a son rebelling against what his father has set out for him. In Smallville, it was this kind of radical notion that Jor-El had sent
Yeah.
him there potentially to be a conqueror. Now, like
Right.
Zach and I talked about, I don't know that Smallville ever had all of that worked out. I think it was an intriguing idea they put forth. I think it's an idea that
Yes.
they actually could have played out more and in greater depth. I think that what we as fans and even the show itself ultimately more or less account for or explain it as is that was an AI divorced from the soul of the man. Because when Clark encounters that video message of Jor-El and Lara in the final season, he says, I'm sending you all of my knowledge and none of my ego or regret. And he even says, no matter what trials I put you through, I will never lose faith in you, right? Even as earlier in the season, the AI Jor-El is like, you'll never be Earth's champion or Earth's savior. So I think that the show ultimately kind of accounted for the fact that this was an AI program and it didn't have the heart of the man. And it fed into this larger journey that he had to sort this out for himself. And this presented yet another obstacle and another challenge. So to answer or Tim's question specifically, would I, as a father myself? No, I would vastly prefer to send the Marlon Brando version of myself as opposed to what we see in Smallville. But for storytelling purposes, I think it worked and it served the story.
It is interesting. I was watching it from an interesting lens too, because I paid very close attention to Marlon Brando's performance in this viewing. And it's, I mean, the amount of money he got for essentially, I think it's something like 10 to 12 minutes of film time. It's mind-boggling. But he really does do quite a good job. Like, he's bananas. Like, he's wackadoo in real life. And even watching some of the interviews in the making of stuff I watched too, I was like, oh, he's cuckoo pants. But he really, you could tell in both the Krypton scenes with the baby and then even in the fortress scenes, his depiction of love for his son was very evident.
I just want to hit pause for a second. So mostly you've been sitting back and you've been totally fine. When you lean forward, I'm getting a little clipping sometimes. So I guess just get comfortable and stay there either way. But I think sitting back, I think we've had a little bit better. It's only been like once or twice where we've had the clip.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Did you get that?
What?
No, I was just saying, is the last part cool?
Oh yeah. No, that's totally fine.
All right, good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with Brando, and I think people have a good understanding at this point about the background and the making of this movie. You had the Salkind the younger, brought this idea to his father, and we had numerous screenwriters brought on. Mario Puzo from The Godfather, who wrote this 500-page tome that was apparently very unwieldy and allegedly filled with a lot of campy humor. Then they also brought on the team that had done the Superman musical. They did a draft. And then ultimately, and you were mentioning this earlier, Donner, when he eventually came aboard as director after a period where Guy Hamilton was going to direct, he brought aboard Tom Mankiewicz. And I would probably argue, without having seen the various drafts that this went through, I think the final product that we got, I think we all owe a great debt probably to Tom Mankiewicz. Yeah. And what's interesting is you have, because we know that the first two movies were filmed together to a point, and then of course Donner was replaced with Richard Lesser, and we'll talk about that more next week. But essentially you have the same screenwriting credits for these first two movies, and then you get to the third one, and it's just written by the Newmans, who came by way of the Superman musical, and that probably speaks for itself about the contributions that Tom Mankiewicz made to this production. But all that to say, in terms of how this came together, yes, it's kind of absurd to consider the amount of money that they paid Marlon Brando for such a limited amount of screen time, but that gave the project, credibility and panache, and it attracted other people to the project. And he has a presence. He really sells this idea, especially in this version where we get to a point, he's the floating head. I mean, it's this omniscient God. It's not the more kind of personal interpretation of the character. And I think it works for what this story is.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, from the original, I think it went Salkinds, Puzo, and then it was Brando and Hackman were the first ones. And Gene Hackman actually didn't really want to do it. because all he really knew was the camp. And but then as he started to really pay attention more, especially when Dick Donner came on, that's when he said, now I know where I'm supposed to go. Like, I'm going to take this. Because it really, Lex Luthor, I worry because sometimes I think they see Gene Hackman as the latter Superman 2, Superman 4 Lex Luthor, but he's quite good in this first movie. And there's a dash of camp when he like is beating on Otis, but it's quite like maniacal, like egomaniac kind of stuff.
It is. And I guess when we talk about the people involved with this, and I mentioned this before, just about the integrity that Christopher Reeve brought, not just Christopher Reeve, but he took this seriously in a way that I really elevated it. And
yeah,
they talk about this in the recent documentary where he went to Gene Hackman and asked to rehearse, and Hackman was a little bit surprised, right? But it showed how much he was putting into it. And then there's a talk show interview. I've seen this clip online of Christopher Reeve talking about Marlon Brando, and specifically when they were filming a portion from Superman 2, the Donner cut, where Jor-El charges Kal-El back up and he's kind of shaking like he's being electrocuted. And Reeve talks about how Brando was like laughing off camera while he was doing that, and how Reeve said to him, like, hey, like I've never done this before. Like, I'm doing the best I can, and I would really appreciate your help. So again, I think the fact that he could advocate for himself in that moment was great, but just he committed to this. Yeah. And that hand in hand with this whole verisimilitude idea and approach that Donner put forth, it's imbued in everything. And that's why when I keep coming back to this idea of the integrity of this story, it's there. It's on full display. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars.
The more I watch this too, and I didn't, I'm looking at Rachel Brosnahan getting cast as Lois Lane. I'm looking at Bitsy Tulloch as Lois Lane for Superman and Lois. If you look at the two of them, and you look at Margot Kidder in this movie, like, first of all, like, I know that she had a hard life past these movies. Things didn't go well for her. If you look at her in this movie, she is on, and she's gorgeous. Like, she is fierce, and she's beautiful, and she's just a great depiction of Lois. And the casting does make sense. There's a heart there. And apparently her and Chris Reeve did not get along. They bickered a lot on the set, but they were also consummate actors, and they went right into I'm in love with you, even though you're driving me nuts. Like, she was very good. And you can definitely see that James Gunn and other people have looked to that depiction as, let's try this.
No, that's a great point. And just to kind of circle back to Tim's question, and kind of, I'll give my take on this whole fortress training.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Historically, I have not liked this. And I have referred to it as programming. This idea that he goes to the fortress and is there for 12 years. And when he's done, he's in the Superman costume and he goes off to Metropolis. Really the only argument that I've been able to accept in defense of it is that it does help explain why no one puts 2 and 2 together. He's been gone for so long and he looks different.
Right.
I guess, and to answer Tim's question specifically, do I see this as a valid way to tell this story? I do, just as now I look at Superboy as a valid way. If the overall question is how does Clark / Kal-El learn to become Superman, I'm more open now to him learning as Superboy or him learning in the Fortress. Is it my preferred version? No, ultimately I do gravitate towards traveling the world and or the gauntlet of Smallville's trials. That is what I go to.
And let's remember that every movie, okay, so if we were going to say, if they were going to make another Superman movie, if James Gunn's saying, I'm going to make an exact adaptation of Mark Waid's Birthright, we have source material that we're following exactly the right way, and we can expect how we can see things. But don't forget, every single movie that has ever been made about Superman has been an interpretation. It's not an adaptation. It's a depiction and interpretation. And so that's the kind of nice thing, is that we're, of course, like 50 years later looking at, oh, well, this was kind of cool, but I didn't love this. That's just the way they chose to spin it. And we have to be okay with that.
No, it's true. And look, I mean, what has my objection? It's not just that, oh, it's not like a different version that I like. The fundamental objection that I think I've had to it is just that you want your character to learn and grow through personal experience, through actively engaging with the world, as opposed to being, you want him to be out there experiencing heartbreak, as opposed to Jor-El telling him about the human heart.
Yes.
Right. So that's the problem that I've had with it. Now, again, it's not the hill I'm going to die on, and I think it works well enough in this case. What I would say, though, is that I honestly, I think I would have just pulled back. I think if you had just had him find the fortress and then huge cut, and I think maybe even though 12 years is condensed into like a minute of screen time, part of me is still like, oh, I think they showed us too much. Had they played it even more ambiguous, I think I might have been more okay with it. However, now in the movie's defense, and this was another kind of new takeaway that I have from watching it, the movie creates some space for interpretation. And this is the most that I think I've ever appreciated that. Now, we don't see Christopher Reeve when he appears in that costume. We don't see him go straight from the fortress to Metropolis. Right. You don't see exactly what happens in between, nor does he ever speak about it. So is there some space to leave it open to interpretation that maybe he actually is out and about in the world and we just don't see that? Similarly, and we will talk more about it at the very end, but the mechanics of the time travel. Fans have debated this for years. And
it's so confusing
there's
to me.
Part of it that frustrates me, but at the same time, I say to myself,
let it
they
be.
kind of left this open, and there's a little bit of mystery that they sprinkle in. They create this space. And so I don't know. I think I'm as okay with this now, especially the fortress training, as I've ever been.
It's interesting that the catch line is, you will believe a man can fly. We have to suspend disbelief. So there are things that you have to also, not to simplify it, but it's a fictional comic book character. Not everything needs to be based in physics. I was watching it and I was catching myself getting frustrated by the timey-wiminess. Like, well, wait a second. What did it not erase? How does this work? But then I went, just stop and be okay with, they went with a trope that seemed to work. I guess with the fortress itself, I wonder about the 12 years is because Jor-El is explaining it to him and he's not experiencing it. Is that why Clark and ultimately Superman come off as very pure when they arrive to Metropolis? Is he unjaded because he hasn't had to deal with the evil of men for the last 12 years? So it made me think about that. It's like, why is he just so kind and nice? It's not just Midwest. He has been with his dad ultimately for 12 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point and a valid question. And the other piece, and I've been mentioning this, is that, and I know you're a man of faith, and I while I don't currently practice now, I spent pre-K through college in Catholic school. So very well versed in all of this. And I think, these days we're very well accustomed to the notion of the Christ allegory when we look at the Superman story. And for better or worse, you could put together a whole montage of instances of Superman doing the Christ pose as he's falling backwards and whatnot. But this movie, and people's mileage will vary, but I mean, this movie really, I think, put forth this notion at a very early juncture. I mean, I don't know if I could go so far as to say it had, I think previously the Moses story was the parallel that we could really clearly draw. Yeah. But I feel like in this, it really hammers home the Christ comparison, and even the design of the ship, right? Very, very reminiscent of the Star of Bethlehem.
Star.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then even beyond that, the fact that just like the Bible story of Jesus, we were there for the birth/arrival. We visit with the character once in adolescence, and then we pick up with them as an adult embarking on the full journey.
Yeah.
Take this wherever you want. I'm just generally, I guess, how do you feel about this sort of line being drawn between Superman and Jesus?
I don't ever see it. I like you said, I think it's a natural, if you're paying attention to faith and you're paying attention to fiction, there's a natural parallel, because there is the father, in this case, sacrifices his son. The sacrifice in this case is he never gets to see his son. He's leaving a dying world. That's the sacrifice. The sacrifice that Superman is making is that he can't interfere. That's what his father has told him. You need to let the hearts and minds of men who have free will make choices for themselves, and you need to help them along the path. So again, you can see all these parallels. So I don't ever take it as disrespect, but sometimes I take it as a just maybe pointing the way to a different way to think of things in life or the world, but not, Superman's Jesus. I would never disrespect that way, but I think it's an interesting parallel.
Yeah, and given how prevalent religion and just different belief systems are in the world, the idea that you would see echoes of those to varying degrees of explicitness in other stories, I do think is natural. And I think you can, I mean, as a kid, was I watching this thinking, oh, it's like Jesus? No, I wasn't there. But then you get older, and I think you're right. And especially this version of Jor-El, who is seemingly omniscient. I know they account for it in terms of Kryptonians, they're advanced, they've accumulated all of this knowledge, but the way it plays is like he knows everything. Yeah. And the fact that, yes, he's sending his son to Earth to save him, to spare him from the planet's destruction, but it's also to show the people of Earth the way, to be the light.
Yes. Right.
So it definitely has that air about it. So, it's just interesting kind of in that sense. But kind of on this note, this is one of the things I've been particularly keen to talk about. There are a couple of things, I guess, that Jor-El says that I'm very curious just to get your take on this. So taking us back to the beginning of the movie on Krypton, and like we said, for the time, I mean, a whole new visual language, this crystal motif that I think is really indelible when people think about Krypton. I mean, it's a big departure from what we had seen in the comics at the time, what the animated series would do in the 90s, certainly what Snyder would do in Man of Steel, but for the era of the Reeve series. And then it was a massive inspiration on Smallville. And of course, Superman Returns harkened back to this as well. So you have a very lengthy period of time where I think if you're thinking about Krypton, you're thinking about these crystals and this visual representation of the fortress. So, that's huge. But when we get to the point of Jor-El placing baby Kal-El in the ship, and he has this whole speech, and it's very moving, and I've gotten more out of it now in recent years than I had before. But the line, and we've talked about this before, but the son becomes the father, and the father the son. I guess and you and I did talk about this when we talked about Superman Returns, but now looking at it in the original, what does that mean to you? What do you think Jor-El is conveying in that moment? Because I think that's one of those things, not that it's inscrutable, but I think you do get different interpretations on that from people. What does it mean to you?
So I'd actually take it literally based on the story itself. So Jor-El is going to die. The only way he can still exist, or the world, science, and knowledge of Krypton can exist, the father lives in the son. The son becomes the father because now the son is carrying on the history and the lineage and the line and the science and the knowledge of Krypton. So he's not only sending their entire civilization with Kal-El, and the son becomes the father, but the father is giving of all of himself in the AI of the crystal, saying, I'm still going to be with you. So I get to actually be you. So I've always taken it that way. I've never taken it necessarily in a spiritual way. I've never taken it in a esoteric way. I've taken it actually in a lineage, passing on the torch, passing on, like when I die, my daughters, I will exist in them because of the stories of me, our family, the things we've laughed about, the knowledge of what I cared about, whether it be Superman, like they all know, like, so I'm living in them. So it is definitely a good commentary on what family actually means. That's how I take it.
I like that. And I think that's ultimately what I gravitate toward as well. I mean, like when I think about my son, it's like, well, I am a son, but now I have become a father, but I'm also passing on what I am to him, both literally in terms of DNA, but also in terms of what we talk about and these lessons and these experiences. It's a beautiful sentiment. And that, I mean, that whole, we'll travel far, my son. It's great. And obviously, and we haven't talked about the music yet, but this John Williams score, it's funny because one of the questions I wanted
breaks me. That music breaks me down every time I listen to it.
We just talked about this last week when I had Ed Gross here talking about his Superman definitive history. And we returned to this eternal question of, is this the music of the Christopher Reeve movie series, or like, is it just the music of Superman? And
it's the music of Superman.
Regardless of whether you want it to be in every Superman project or not, there's no denying you hear that music and you think of Superman. And I guess this is one of the other things I was thinking about. This is a movie in, I would argue, 4 acts. It does buck the traditional 3-act structure because it's Krypton, it's Smallville, it's Metropolis, and then it's the desert.
I love you so much because I literally have headings exactly like that. Because this is a chaptered book.
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%.
It's literally set up in chapters. And I have headings in my notes of what you just said. And
they're it's amazing. I'm all in on this movie now because
yeah, man.
You look at this and our first chapter, we have this alien sci-fi piece. Mm-hmm. Then we go tranquil Norman Rockwell-esque farm fields.
Then it takes time. It takes the time to show you that difference too.
Yes. And then we have 1970s New York and a pimp on the street and a mugger in the alley and a bustling city newsroom and all the people on the street taking in Superman. And then we have this whole final set piece with the earthquake and the dam and all of that. So it really is, it feels like 4 distinct pieces, yet I would argue the movie does not feel disjointed.
Correct.
And people might disagree on that, but I think it ties together. And it's particularly remarkable to me because, yes, the character of Kal-El is present throughout the movie, baby, adolescent, adult.
Yes.
Yet played by multiple different actors. So it's not like, oh, yeah, we're following the same guy throughout the whole thing.
Right.
Yet again, the movie does feel unified. This might be impossible to answer or maybe really easy to answer.
Yeah.
What unifies this movie? What makes these 4 distinct acts feel of a single piece? Is it the music? Like, is it the score that ties this whole thing together? Is it this verisimilitude? What is it?
Gosh, I can go the simple. I mean, the simple answer to me is the meaning behind Superman. For me, it's the hope of what this story tells. Because if you look at Krypton, it's the hope that this boy is going to survive. If you look at Smallville, it's the hope that this kid he has these powers, but he's going to grow into something more. In the Fortress, it's this hope that I'm going to become what I've been destined to be. And he learns that through Jor-El. But then the last act is Luthor and evil and people dying, and he's the hope that's going to save it all. Like that, to me, that's how I feel. And not to be lame or silly, but that's what the S stands for.
Yeah, it's not an S.
It's not an S.
It's not an S. No. I know. I think that's well said. But so, just a couple other things about the Krypton piece of it.
Yeah,
man, it's such a great touch to start with the sentencing of Zod, Nan, and Ursa. And yes, the fact that they were making these two movies together and they knew where they were going, but especially for that, now we take it for granted. You go to one of these superhero movies, you're expecting breadcrumbs and Easter eggs and post-credit scenes. Yeah. But this was a different era. So to kind of plant this seed, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, Terrence Stamp, man, he makes a meal of this. Like, you will kneel before me. And one day, your ass. Like, it's great.
Oh, it's like very Shakespearean. Yeah.
What Jor-El occupies quite a role in this society. He is prosecutor and head scientist.
Well, it's odd. It's because I almost don't go prosecutor, but remember something we learned in this special edition, which I don't believe we learned in the original, is that Jor-El found and kind of invented this Phantom Zone, or the gate to the Phantom Zone. And I'll tell you, I even wrote here, the Phantom Zone existed in the Silver and Golden Age. Like the Phantom Zone projector, Jor-El created that, and then Superman had it. But it was that ray, right? It was the projector ray.
Yep.
I don't know who came up with this, whether that was Mankiewicz, but I think it's very clever. The glass pane, and they're trapped. And one of the lines that they cut that was back in the special edition is that Jor-El makes it a point of saying that's an eternal life in hell, but they'll be alive longer than we are.
Yeah.
And I was like, and they don't believe him. But I feel like he was doing all of that because he's like, well, I created it, so now I'm the one that has to deal with it.
Yeah, no, fair. And then we'll talk more about Zod next time, but he's like Lucifer cast out and then he returns. We're very biblical. Now, I think folks are aware of this, but the original ending for Superman the movie, it was going to be a cliffhanger. And essentially you see it at the start of the Donner Cut. The idea is that when Superman diverts that nuclear missile at the climax of the film and pushes it into space, that's the explosion that frees Zod, Nan, and Ursa. Now, in the theatrical cut of Superman 2, they replaced that with the bomb in Paris that he hurls into space.
Right.
But the original idea was that the end of this movie was going to be a cliffhanger. Like, they're free and they're headed towards Earth.
In this edition, does he send that missile to space?
Yeah.
He does, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, good. And it's hard because my brain, it always switches between the ones that I remember and this one too.
Yeah. Which would have been, I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I'm kind of glad Superman the movie exists wholly unto itself. I mean, that Zod thread is still out there, but there's something to me kind of pure about the fact that no, it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. And
agreed.
The fact that they reworked the ending of this movie to have Lois die and then have Superman change time, that puts a ton of meat on the bone. I think, it's so funny because for a while I was like, what the hell was the original ending other than that cliffhanger? Like what was this going to be? And I read one of the that part of a draft And essentially, like, he just saves Lois. Like, he just shows up in time and she's fine. So it reads as kind of anticlimactic. I guess, though, if you have the cliffhanger to come, that gives you a little bit of juice coming out of the movie. And I think that was the original plan. But if you're not going to do that cliffhanger, well, then you need something far more impactful for the end. And then so I think they stuck the landing.
Well, and that's also odd because I can't think of other movies prior to that ever did a cliffhanger.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Because I want you to think too, like, what besides really terrible versions, like I know the Magnificent Seven and some of the older Westerns, they had like fake sequels that were not the same. But I mean, Superman 2 in my brain, besides Empire Strikes Back, is one of the first sequels that actually starts that whole idea.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So can we just sit on Krypton for 1 second?
Oh, yes.
So that whole sequence too, from a sci-fi standpoint, I remember seeing that as a kid. And even now I'm looking at it, I was in awe of just the special effects. Because all of that ice is models. Like, that's all modeling. And that dome is a model and lighting is used. So that scene, honestly, that's not only epic, but that scared the living heck out of me. Like, as a kid, I was like, this is kind of that dome opening and then that light going up and then the thing coming down. There was something about that. And then also the glowing clothes. And I got to look up. I want to do a deep dive on how they did that.
Yeah, it's on one of the special features because like a couple of years ago when I went through all of them, I didn't rewatch them. It's just some sort of reflective material that they use. It is so accounted for some. People are listening and they know exactly how they did it. I don't remember offhand, but yeah,
I'm sorry I don't. But it grabbed me when I watched it today.
I mean, that's the thing with this is that when you think about what they were able to do with miniatures, with Krypton, the fortress, the village at the end of the movie, it's really astounding. And especially when you get to the destruction of Krypton, I mean, it has this real horror movie vibe to it.
I wrote that I really, it's one of those reasons. Remember like the first Star Wars 2, when that original Death Star goes, that's like epic to me. And then when they changed it in the special edition, it really pissed me off and a lot of other people. But when you really freeze and watch the sun and Krypton go, that's hardcore. Like, that was a great explosion.
Yeah. And the two scenes that we mentioned that were inserted back into the special edition, I'm very glad they're there because, again, you see that tension between Jor-El and the Council, and then you see the Council sending their hooded agent to go after Jor-El because they notice that there's the spike in energy from his lab as he's getting the ship ready. And then if you watch the television, that 3-hour television cut, then you see that agent, like making his way through. You get even more with that.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But I feel like that, it just adds a whole other piece, and certainly a piece that we are very used to in terms of the Krypton Jor-El side of it. And it also, maybe it didn't need any more urgency because the planet was going to blow up, but you then also have them being hunted by the Science Council. So I'm glad those scenes are there. And I really think that fleshes out the Krypton piece of it. And like I said, I love the George Reeves series, but you look at that and you look at the Kirk Allen serials, they tackle the origin very similarly.
Oh, okay.
And not a ton of emotion when it comes to placing Kal-El in the rocket. It's sort of like shoving that kid in the rocket. And that was also in the era of Lara could have gone, but she rather stay with Jor-El so they could die together, which anytime we encounter that in other media or comics, I'm banging my head against the wall. It's like, come on. How, if you have the chance, how would you not go with your child? This makes no sense. So here, and look, we see this origin told a lot of times.
Yes.
And look, for me, do I cry the most at the Man of Steel version? Yes, I do. I do. With he'll be a god to them. Like, that gets me. But this was an early instance where they injected so much emotion into the proceeding. And even when you have that back and forth of Lara talking about how he'll be different, he'll be an outcast, and Jor-El keeps talking about how, well, the atmosphere will sustain him, right? Like, they're approaching it from different sides. But I really like that juxtaposition and that back and forth. And you feel it when they send their child off in a way that those prior incarnations did not conjure.
And I really always, it for some reason gets me right in the feels when she puts her head on Jor-El. Like, because he's basically saying goodbye, and you see that she's like torn up. That always gets me, because it's like, oh, now they really know. And when they're running through, they're gonna die. But that scene when everybody's falling, that's terrifying. Like, that's because they're all like falling to the core of the planet ultimately before it explodes. That'd be terrifying.
Yeah.
Again, this is a 1978 movie. They did incredible stuff.
I really was thinking a lot about this, and we've looked at so many incarnations of Krypton. I feel like this one does a really nice job. Again, I think Man of Steel does too, though, of an alien world. How do I put this? The John Byrne Man of Steel version, right, went so far in the direction of so cold and sterile. And I think that just overshot the mark. I think like what you see here with the kind of the crystal motif, there is a quote unquote coldness, but not at the expense of the warmth between the characters.
Agreed.
And it feels like an alien world. Whereas, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you look at traditional comic book depictions, like the Silver Age version of Krypton, I mean, it does feel different than Earth, but I don't know, maybe not quite different enough. Like this really feels distinct, yet again, I don't think we run into the territory of it's this cold, sterile place.
Agreed. And what got me in Man of Steel was that Jor-El dies first.
Yeah.
That hurts me more, that like he's literally protecting everything and he gets killed by Zod, right?
Yeah.
And then it's Lara being alone with Kal-El that kind of gets me. That, and then she, like you see her burn up, and I'm like, oh God, like it's good. Like both of these versions are very different, but equally touching and terrifying.
So it's not a competition, but I this is in my head as we're talking about the Jor-El piece, and we'll get back to Smallville, but I want to continue on this thread of like what Jor-El says and what he means.
Right.
So it's just fascinating to me that you get to that point in Man of Steel when Clark finds his ship and he encounters hologram Jor-El and he's explaining where Kal-El comes from and all of that. And Russell Crowe's Jor-El says, "You're as much a child of Earth now as you're of Krypton." Right? And it's like, oh, and you can be the bridge between our two worlds. And it's
that was
like,
a good
this is beautiful.
That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I was practicing. We were picking up sushi earlier tonight. I was in the parking lot. I was talking. Steph was like, "What are you doing?"
You got to be ready.
Versus my Brando won't be as good, but versus Marlon Brando's Jor-El, who's like, even though you've been raised among them, you are not one of them. It's just interesting to me, that contrast. Right. And I think to me, that sort of goes back to this whole idea of God among men versus man with the power of God. But anyway, that's its own thing. But I'm curious what your take is on what in Superman, the movie, what Jor-El actually intends for Kal-El. Because there's this business at the conclusion of his training, right, where he says, again, what the line I just said about even though you've been raised among humans, you are not one of them. But he says, live among them, see how best, I forget the exact line, but something to the effect of see how and where it's best to use your strength. Something, something to that effect.
Well, I think the difference is the Smallville version is conquer.
Right.
Right. The Man of Steel version would be what? How would you define that in one word?
Hope or bridge, I guess.
Okay. But I kind of see, and you could disagree, I kind of see Jor-El as live, like survive. Like it's more legacy and live than an act of doing something. Because he says live as one of them and see how you can, he doesn't say conquer them. He doesn't say rule them. He doesn't say you're a god. Live among them.
Right. Well, I know. I want to tie this together because I've really been wrestling with this. So yes, live among them. But he says they can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. That's why I've sent them you, my only son. They only lack the light to show the way. And then,
but don't we all? Is that all of our jobs? Think of it like like our I see it as we shouldn't just live in the world. How do we make it better?
Right.
And that's ultimately, he has powers to do that. We don't.
Right. But so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, so he says all of that. And then of course, this line that we've already cited about you are forbidden to interfere with the course of human history.
Right.
But when the training is done, Kal-El is in his costume. I don't think Martha sent him to the fortress with that and he put it on. My interpretation has always been Jor-El bestows that to him at the conclusion of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the scene that was not in the theatrical cut, but that's in the special edition, and that I think is really important because it shows Kal-El's humanity, his fallibility, after that first night of saves when he's with Jor-El in the fortress, and he's like, you enjoyed yourself. And Superman's like, yeah, I got carried away. And Jor-El's like, I anticipated this. And it's this great, Christopher Reeve, I love this scene where he's like, you couldn't have anticipated this.
Yeah, right.
But we get to a point in that scene where Jor-El says,
it's about vanity.
But also he's like, you are revealed to the world now. Very well. What now? Maybe I am reading too much into this, or something is not dawning. My read on it's almost like Jor-El didn't intend for Kal-El to be public. But so what's the business with the costume?
I mean, is that...
And while you're thinking about that, let me pose this to, let me make it even more complicated. Here's the other thing. This has come up whenever we've talked about the ending with reversing time. When Jor-El says you are forbidden to interfere with the course of human history, what does he mean by that? Does he know?
Does he know you can reverse time?
Well, I mean, this is the question that I've been going back and forth on for years, which is his very presence in the world as a public superhero changes the course of human history.
It interferes.
Is that what he means? Or does he mean literally don't rewrite time?
Yes, I think the answer is both. I think Jor-El knows there's really no limit to his power. And that's what is probably the warning. Like, beware. Like, you can do pretty much anything. And because of that, you will interfere if you're not careful. So I think his warning is, you really need to live amongst them. And that's why they said the secret identity is so important.
Right.
What were the three? I wrote them down.
Again, well, the two reasons why, because humanity would call upon him 28 hours a day.
Yes.
They would rely on him for problems that they could solve themselves, and that his enemies would know to hurt the people close to him. It's fascinating because when Jor-El says you must maintain your secret identity, Superman's like, why?
Yeah.
So it's like, he was real quick. He was ready to abandon Clark Kent, which...
Well, and that was very human, though. I think he was now like, hey, I can do these really great things. I can help people because he's also pure. He's a good guy. He's been raised and by Jor-El made to be good. Right.
I don't mean to belabor the point, and we'll move on. Yeah. I'll just say, I don't know that there's really a clear answer to this, because I just say to myself, we put Kal-El in a costume, and yet...
Is that legacy?
Maybe. I guess I just wonder, did Jor-El intend for Kal-El to be this publicly known superhero, saving people the way he is? Because the costume tends to point in that direction, but the live among them and, you're revealed to the world now very well, and you're forbidden to interfere with the course of human history, leads me to believe that's not what he intended. But I'm kind of having a hard time reconciling that. That's all. That's what I continue to kind of battle.
No, I get it. Yeah. Well, and that kind of might just fall... I hate to be this way. That might just fall into the column of plot hole. That might just fall into it might not have been the best writing. Like that, they left too many things open with that. How many movies have you like, wait, what does that line mean?
Yeah. So, in any event though, again, I think the Krypton sequence is very effective. My enjoyment of that has really grown a lot over the years. I would still say Man of Steel cemented me as a fan of that part of the story. But I look back at this and I get a lot more out of it. And then, I mean, the Smallville chapter, I don't think we have the Smallville TV series if not for this.
Anthony, I've seen this. I don't even know how many times I've seen this movie. I think it's got to be at least 15 times at least. And I love that I can still find things that I go, wow. First of all, let's talk about when he realizes he needs to leave. the filming of all of that, like from even that nice moment when like they added back in mom coming back in and looking for Clark, and then they see him like way in the distance, and then it's just the sea of of the wheat and all that, and the score behind it. It's incredible. Like I don't refer, and I know you'll appreciate this too. There are movies that I refer to as movies, and there's movies that I refer to as films. And I will always say this is an incredible film because there is intentionality, and the filming of that scene, the scenery behind the funeral. I have never paid attention more to like the landscape. That's on location. That is incredible where they filmed that.
I agree. And like I said, going back through all those old Superboy comics recently, I was struck by, like they're just in town, they're running the store. There is something really kind of primal about putting them on the farm. They're of the earth. Jonathan works with his hands, just like Joseph the Carpenter.
Nice. Well done.
So you have that. But
it just, man, I don't know why this viewing, I just soaked it all in. And I noticed it was a lot of, I feel like it was intentional time taken to just look at the majesty of it all. So
I agree. It's funny because I think what I was really struck by this time was just how efficient the storytelling is there. I think in my mind, and this is a credit to them, I think in my mind, I always feel like that segment is longer than it actually is, but you watch it and it's just a few minutes and they cover so much from the ship arriving and Jonathan and Martha, and they're in their church clothes clearly, right? Like they're clearly coming to or from church.
Yeah.
And they take this child home, and then the next scene, Clark's in high school and he's the equipment manager on the team, and he's ostracized by Brad, who we'll see come back in Superman 3. But kicking the football, yearning to be on the team, racing against the train, and you see the joy, and then standing there when the kids drive by and he's like, I ran. And then Jonathan calls him out and he's like, showing off a bit, huh, son? But it taps into, I mean, you look at the Smallville TV show and it's like all of those themes about wanting to be normal, wanting to use his powers to play, like all of that stuff is right there. Now, for the Smallville TV show, it has to be that gauntlet. There have to be those trials. Otherwise we have no show.
Right. Yeah.
But I do always, there's something about the Superman, the movie version of Smallville where, like I was saying earlier, there's a lot we don't see. So I think there is maybe some room for interpretation, but I think the intention, in my heart, I think the intention is it's a really tranquil upbringing.
Yes.
And he learns from his parents those values of being a friend, because later he'll say to Lois, I'm a friend, right? About being a good friend and a good neighbor. And Christopher Reeve, I'm sure we've all seen those clips of him on a talk show discussing that very notion about what Superman means to him. Right. And how it's rooted in these traditional American values of helping your fellow man. Very idealized, lovely notion that I don't know that we always see, but it's a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he gets from that time in Smallville. And I think it's the calm before what his life will become. And so, if you're doing a Smallville TV series, no, we need the trials. But I think in other tellings, I think there's something really kind of beautiful about just this quiet time before it all begins.
I never also, well, I shouldn't say never. I've always thought this, but I think it stood out a lot to me in this viewing. I will stack the film score that John Williams wrote for this movie up against, like, put another score in front of me that has the same kind of depth and diversity across. It's out of control. Like even the March of the Villains, boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's such. Do you know what program music is? Have you heard of that phrase? Program music as a composer came along like way back in the early stages of like the Romantic period, where you started to write music to tell a story. This is like a perfect example of like how you can hear characters in the film. And I will stack this up against any film score. It's just beautiful to me.
I know it's funny because I feel like we always think about the bum, ba, 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 and yes, but the whole score is absolutely magnificent. And like I said, just how economical this storytelling is. It's this one scene and this one shot of them walking up the driveway, and this famous speech about, well, and even before the heart of it about being sent here for a reason, just this idea of, we always thought someone would come and take you away, right? Like tapping in again to these very core, ideas. But essentially saying that, you were sent here for a reason. I don't know whose reason or what that reason is, but I know it wasn't to score touchdowns. But what Clark is articulating, when we look at truly the character's journey and the things he struggles with and the humanity that's on display, I think this is a key instance and example of that. Just this idea of, and I love the way he puts it, of I'm only doing what I'm capable of doing, right? Is it wrong for a bird to fly, right? Like that's what it does.
That. Yeah. I love that. The part about Smallville that I really enjoyed on this one, and I've always seen this scene. I don't know why I've noticed when young Lois is on the train.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that was extended. Was that an extended scene?
Yeah.
Because when she's like, nobody ever believes me. And I was like, that's so great that she's going to be the one that gets to actually interview him.
It's a nice touch. And so that's the cameo from Noelle Neal from Adventures of Superman, who played Lois in seasons 2 through 6, and also Lois in the serials, and Kirk Allen from the movie serials. And they play Lois's parents. And yes, that's an extended piece in the special edition. Again, I don't mean to beat on poor Kirk Allen. I'm glad he had the opportunity. It breaks my heart a bit, though, because had George Reeves lived, I like to think that would have been him sitting there. And that would have been something. But anyway, when Jonathan goes down, and he grabs his arm.
That kills me every time, man.
The look and the, oh no, like he knows it's his time. I tear up even thinking about it, but like it reminds me of All-Star Superman in the Smallville issue when like Pa knows his time is up in that panel, right? And he's talking to the future Superman, right? And when he just says like, will he be all right? The boy, will he be all right? Like that, like he knows his time is up, and that, oh God. But anyway, like it's just, it's so powerful, and Martha's scream and them all converging together.
Oh God. And then the filming, I love that the filming is far.
Yes.
But it's amazing how the filming is almost drone far away, but the emotion you can still see from far away. That's what I'm like. That's just good filmmaking. Like it's so strong.
And the line that we already cited about all these things I can do, all these powers, and I couldn't save him. Yeah. Look, we've talked about this so many times over the years about whether Jonathan should die as part of the origin story. And I think if you are going to have that happen, I think if the reason, or at least a reason, is to convey that message, that lesson to Clark, that for all the things he can do, you are not a god.
You're not a god.
There's something very powerful. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. We keep bouncing back to the ending, and I have to ask this question because this is something else that I really wrestle with. What is Clark's ultimate lesson, or what is the movie's ultimate point? Because this seems to be a pretty core fundamental idea. For all that you can do, you can't save everyone, and sometimes there is a limit. But we get to the end of the movie and Superman, he defies that. He has the opportunity to save someone in a way that he couldn't save Jonathan when he died. And he exercises that option. He takes it and he is successful. And there are no consequences, despite the protestations of Jor-El. This is for years. I don't know where I really land on this. And I'm curious to get your take. It's like, what? I don't know. I mean, what is the point here? It's like rules are made to be broken. Is it that?
Yeah.
What is the takeaway?
Yeah, I think this is this would fall into too for me, like kind of with the time travel thing. I don't like that they even set up that Lois was going to die. I think she's too strong of a character to even play with that. I mean, if you think about it, it's been a rarity across all of comic book history that she's even come close to, like, there's not been that. I struggle with the fact that it was a lesson that had no consequences. I think it's something that Smallville remedied.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's, okay, you chose to save Lana. It doesn't work that way. Someone needs to go.
So here, I think I do know where I land on this. How do I put this? Had the ending we got been merged with the original cliffhanger ending, and however it plays out, the idea is that because he changed time, now the missile is going to release Zod.
Yes.
This works for me all the way.
I'm with you. That's a consequence.
That's a consequence, because this is just like, you are forbidden to interfere, and he does it, and it's just like, fine.
And because he's turning this world back, it changes the course of the missile. That to me is a automatic good writing fix. But I guess the way I land on it is either he saves Lois and breaks the rules, and the lesson is there's a consequence. I don't love that. There's none. This would fall a little bit too much in. Campy is not the right word for it, but it's too hokey, I guess, for me. Like, he's got to save the girl, and now everything's okay, and now he gets to be happy.
I know. Again, historically, I felt that, but I don't know. Maybe
I go back and forth.
If one of the things that I've always had a problem with is I felt like this version of Superman is just a little bit inaccessible or a little bit removed. I've really overcome most of that, because in rewatching this, again, the Smallville stuff was always resonant. You always see the humanity, the fallibility, the struggle. And rewatching it so closely, and some of these scenes that we've already talked about, the vanity in the discussion with Jor-El, the transition scene that we'll talk about, and when he's in Lois's apartment. And then, of course, when we get to the climax, his despair over failing to save Lois, and then his defiance when he breaks Jor-El's rule. I think you see all of this. So I don't know, though. It's like, if the takeaway is like, he can break, this was an instance where he broke a rule, like he did something selfish.
Yeah.
And I mean, selfless, he is saving another life, but it's like, he still broke this rule. I don't know. I mean, I think
Are we
I'd
jaded?
be okay with it.
Are we jaded because there's other darker depictions? Maybe. Like, I wonder too, because like we've seen all the different versions of that, right? So maybe this version is Superman kind of wins for everybody else. He gets one too.
It's funny, a very silly personal anecdote, but the other day I was driving my 5-year-old son to karate after school, and he had to go to the bathroom as we're driving, and we happened to be passing by Starbucks. And on this street here, you can't turn into one of the entry points that would be most convenient. You have to go up, but there was a backup there, and it was an emergency. And so I turned where you weren't supposed to.
You broke a rule.
He knows the rules well enough, and he was asking me about it, and I was like, you're not supposed to do that. I said, well, when I have to help you or mommy, like I break a rule if I have to.
Well, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like, if Steph is pregnant and you need to get to the hospital, you're breaking the speed limit.
Right.
Like, you're not being like, hold on, it says 25 miles an hour. No, like, and then when you get pulled over, the cops are like, oh, okay, I understand. But I mean, no, I think again, we're attaching so many real world rules to a man who can fly.
But we're in a world created by this movie that's anchor point is authenticity. So I don't think it's unreasonable to have these discussions.
Agreed. No, I agree. But I think, I think we need to sometimes be okay with not being okay.
Yes. And I think, Joe, this whole idea of where this movie creates the space for these questions or the interpretation, yes, it could be a plot hole or something lacking, but I think it's a strength of the movie. Now, again, we're still going to get to the time travel, but in the Smallville piece here, I agree with you wholeheartely. The scene where he leaves Martha, and when she says, "Remember us," she's telling him always hold on to Smallville. She started to say always, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but I almost forgot. I'm like, wait, does she say always hold on to Smallville? Like, I couldn't remember if she said that or not, and then I was like, oh no, I'm an idiot. She doesn't say it, but it's heartbreaking.
But she does,
and the music and the setting, everything you said is spot on. We talked about this when we covered this movie before. I think it's a very interesting choice that you never see Superman return to the farm later in the movie or the next movie.
Not until 2006.
Right. And yes, when Clark gets to the planet, he asks Perry to send half of his paycheck back home.
To his silver-haired mother.
Right. Now, presumably, after he's done training, he visits Martha, but you don't see it. And there's such a finality to that scene between them. I don't know. I mean, like in your headcanon, does he go back home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does.
But what do you think about the movie's choice not to show that?
Because it's chapters. I think that's the way they're going. It's like, because we don't allude back to Krypton. We have the fortress, but we never allude back to the destruction of Krypton or anything that happened before, right? We don't allude back to Smallville except by name, by words, right? So, I mean, I think it was a definitive choice. I think it was, nope, that we've gone past the act of that movie. We're going to focus on the Metropolis now.
And I think I get it. And I guess it's fine. Part of me, well, I'm working out a lot here in real time as we're talking, because I think one of the things that I feel like maybe I've bumped up against in the past is that throughout most of this movie, from the point that he's Christopher Reeve, in the theatrical cut, there are almost no instances where you just see him as himself. He's always Clark or Superman. Now, that's why that scene, the vanity scene with Jor-El in the fortress, is interesting, because but even that, he's in his costume, he's communing with Jor-El. It's a little bit different. I think had you seen Christopher Reeve Clark, go to the farm to check in with Martha, I think you would have seen the truest representation of who this character is. And I think in the past, it's bothered me that we didn't see that. But now I don't know, it's creating a little bit more of a mystery around the character and a little bit more space around the character, but I'm all right.
Yeah. I think we're also spoiled by 10 years of Smallville, where we saw Clark in the fortress dressed as Clark. Right? Like there was no tights. So like I would almost sometimes rather see, I mean, there were times, like if you think about Superman 2, where he's wearing like the dress shirt and slacks, no tie, no glasses, and he's in the fortress. I think that's awesome. I love that. It's like, oh, Clark is in the fortress now. And there's kind of a blurry line between Clark and Superman.
Yeah, I know.
We're not there yet.
I know. And we'll get there next week. The last thing on the Smallville piece that I want to say is just, when that crystal calls out to him, the green crystal.
Oh, gosh, it's so cool.
It's interesting to me because when he eventually gets to the fortress, Jor-El mentions the fact that he's reached his 18th year. Now, do we think that, because we don't know how much time passes between Jonathan's funeral and the crystal calls out. Does the crystal call out to him when he hits 18? Or does the crystal know that he is now ready to
time.
begin his journey. So that's why it's like there's something mystical, religious, whatever you want to call it, about it's not just sci-fi Kryptonian tech.
No,
there's something kind of mystical
there's
that it knows its time.
Or the crystal is paying attention. Because again, the father is now the son. There's still a connection somehow. My question that I kind of noticed too was, does the crystal know that there's now an absence of the father that needs to be filled by Jor-El?
Oh, I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because now it's like, okay, now your earthly father is gone. Now is the time for you to be trained by your actual father. That was a cool, like, I was like, oh, that was a neat thing. There's also the cool musical throwback, because at the very, very beginning is the ba, 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 ba. And when that crystal hums, you hear that theme really slow. It's like, oh, see, that's the only throwback. And that's like, it's time. It's time to come to the fortress.
Shall we move to Metropolis now?
Oh yeah, baby. I got a whole list.
Now, we've already hit on a lot about this kind of how Clark conducts himself and whatnot. But, well, let me toss it to you first. Where would you like to go?
Okay, let me look. If it's okay, I'd love to jump to like when we first see Superman.
The first night of saves.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know why I've never noticed this. I probably heard it, but I always paid attention to the pimp more than I paid attention to the next line. He's either a dude or he's a cameraman or somebody that goes, what the hell is that? Like, and it's the most accurate interpretation of, if you saw a dude just fly out of the crowd to go save someone. And I was like, oh, I don't know why I've never really noticed that. But that's the first, like, real reaction. It wasn't like, oh, Jack, dude, look at you. It was more, some guy just flew out of nowhere. It's like, what the hell? Like, what was that? And instead of saying it's a bird, it's a plane, it's the most real reaction from a 1970s citizen.
Dude, totally. That first night of saves, when he springs into action and catches Lois in the helicopter, the famous line, "You've got me, who's got you?" And "Who are you? A friend." And then everything that follows when he stops the mugger who's crawling up the side of the building.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And the guy's making the getaway on the boat. And the little girl with the cat stuck up in the tree, who then gets smacked when she goes inside. Very dark.
Oh, which still really dark. And even the cops, even how the cops are so confused.
Right. But so it's a wonderful sequence. And I think really just kind of a centerpiece of the movie, and certainly of that sequence. Yeah. I think what I value more, I appreciate more now rewatching this, does this get into the moral or philosophical questions that Man of Steel and BVS do about his role in the world? No, but this does a really good job of capturing the wonder. And of course, it's the headline, Caped Wonder, Stunned City. But all the people's reaction on the street, and you cited a perfect example, but of like, they're genuinely like gobsmacked by this. And I really appreciated that more so than ever. It really captures the wonder of what people would think if they saw this.
And there's such a token, like, New York lady, like, oh, he caught her. Like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Like, it was so classic.
Yeah, I know. It's great. It's great. And that, this whole notion of being a friend, and, just kind of the way he regards the police officer and the little girl, like, there's, not breaking any new ground here with this, but that presence that Christopher Reeve has, and he just, there's a kindness, a grace, a gentleness, but a strength and a power as well. And you really see that when he confronts Lex later on.
Yes.
So it's certainly not one note or anything like that, but it's so striking. It really feels like the character, stepping off the page. And for people who, And again, this is not limited to the Snyder stuff. Or you look at Smallville, you look at other iterations where the character struggles a little bit more internally. It's not that there's none of that here. There are instances, and we've cited and we'll continue to cite. But this is, by and large, especially by comparison, a Superman, I think, pretty at peace with kind of who he is and what he's going to do.
Yes.
And there's something refreshing about that.
I love this viewing, really watching, like you said, there were the beats that we always know that stick out. There's a lot of things about Metropolis in general that I feel like I paid attention to more. I was very in tune to the Daily Planet stuff on this viewing. And watching all of the other characters, the side characters, even some of the lines that I never really thought were as funny as they were. Like, any more Home Like You? I've always thought that was funny. But even how he reacts, he's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's not talking about Smallville, everybody. He's talking about Krypton.
No, it's so good. And even later on when Perry is giving everyone their orders and he's asking these questions, like to Lois, does he have a girlfriend? And then he goes to Clark, who's his favorite ball team? And Clark starts to answer.
He goes to answer. I love that. He's like, well, it was almost like, well, actually.
Yeah. No, it's great. But, yeah. I mean, the fact that, look, so it's New York City doubling as Metropolis, which does that make it feel distinct? No. But I mean, I love the backdrop of 1970s New York.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't begrudge them that. And where I feel like they knocked it out of the park. I mean, that feels like a 1970s newsroom. I mean, it's bustling with activity. There's a ton of people. The noise is it feels like that. Oh, and even just the first reveal of Lois as Jimmy is adjusting the focus on his camera. That's great.
Well, and the thing is too, I think it doesn't always hit now, because the newspaper business is so dying. So having him really work for a Daily Planet doesn't make sense. But in this setting, hearing the typewriters, seeing the papers, everybody's reading a paper, that was indicative of the time. And that makes sense.
I mean, I've been in the New York Times, Bill. It's so quiet. It's so quiet.
There's no, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The mugging scene, I still love. All of that is classic to me. How he x-rays her purse. He knows exactly what's in her purse. I find Lois's spelling issues are always funny to me, throughout the movie. I don't know why. It's like, you're a star reporter. Theoretically, as awards, it's like, you can't spell anything right. Rapist has 2 P's. It's not good.
It's particularly egregious. I don't mind it so much here, especially in a typewriter era. And this is people have mentioned this in other episodes. It's like now it's become such a shtick with her, and in an age where it's spell check, and even on your phone it autocorrects. It's like, come on, how much could she possibly still be struggling with this?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I was watching Jackie Cooper a lot in this too. He's just a joy. He's just funny. Did you catch there's that one reporter that she seems to have there's some faces she makes she kind of has the hots for Perry.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
There's a young redhead who's definitely a younger one. And he kind of makes some comment to her and she gives him the, hey. And he's and he pauses hey, and then he walks away. But I was like, there's a lot of funny, odd innuendos. God, especially in the interview between him and Lois, there are some lines that I was like, oh, that was pushing the PG line quite a bit.
Well, kind of on that note, I mean, I think when we talk about the Metropolis sequence, I think it's the newsroom, it's the first night of saves, and it's the date, the interview.
Lois. Yes. Because all of that, when she says, how big are you by accident? I was like, oh, what? Wait a second. What just happened? Did that just really happen again?
When she asks if he has a girlfriend and he's like, I don't, but if I did, you'd be the first to know, Lois. And then he covers his mouth. He's so sly. I love how sly this guy is.
It's just so great. And then do you do you have all bodily functions? Do you eat? Like, oh no, stop it. Like, it was making me laugh more than ever. It was fun.
It's such a sweet, humorous scene.
Yes.
It shows a whole other side of the character.
Yeah.
Or both characters. Again, all the business with the X-ray vision. I mean, it's such a well-written scene because she pushes him first, right? Like, what color underwear am I wearing? But he can't because of the lead. And then when she moves away and he's like, and she says like, oh, have I made you uncomfortable?
He's looking.
And then he turns it back around when he says pink. And it's like, no, have I made you uncomfortable? And then a few beats later, do you like pink? Yes, Lois, I like pink very much. Oh man, it's great. And yes, I know, again, by today's standards, no, not particularly risque, but for the time, yeah.
But sweetly risque, not dirtily risque.
Exactly. It will forever bother me. I like the idea that he, as he articulates at the beginning, I know people have questions about me I want to answer. And so the fact that he says where he's from, but the lead, it's like, buddy, don't give away your secrets.
I'm like, I literally wrote, silly Clark, why would you tell a reporter your biggest weakness?
Dude, if he had known about kryptonite, 1000% he would have been like, well, there is this, if you see any glowing green rocks, it could kill me.
Oh yeah. Don't get on those. Don't collect those. Oh my gosh.
When, go ahead.
The fight. Yeah, I know. I laughed when he said the American way.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, you'll be fighting every politician. I was like, oh, even in the 70s.
I know. Yeah, that was very interesting. And when he offers to take her flying and she has this line about Clark says you're not real, you make believe, like Peter Pan.
Peter Pan. Yeah.
And he says, Peter Pan flew with children, Lois, in a fairy tale. Oh my God. This came up last week when I talked to Ed Gross about how for Adventures of Superman fans, they really looked at George Reeves in this paternal sense. He was really like this father figure. And that was not a show designed for romance in any way.
Correct.
This Superman is a lover, in a very different way. There's not like, I don't think you have the people looking at Christopher Reeve as that father figure. It's a very different vibe. I like it.
Well, it's a man. He's a regular person who needs connection, and he hasn't had any for 12 years. So it's not like horny.
He hasn't had anything.
Not any. But I mean, he's now seeing not only a girl that he finds attractive, but is the first person to possibly know both of him, to now learn about Clark and to also know more about Superman. So there's a connection there.
And he says, who's Clark? Is that your boyfriend?
Yeah. Like poke, poke, poke.
Now he says to her, I never lie.
Yeah.
What do we make? Because here's the funny thing. On Adventures of Superman, it's this running thing where I know there are exceptions where either Clark or Superman outright lies, but for the most part, he chooses his words really carefully. Like if he, I don't know, has to get back to I think there was a scene with Superman and Jimmy, and Superman had excused himself as like, I have to go to the Daily Planet. The line was something to the effect of, oh, Clark can't do his work if I'm not there. It's like, that's technically true. That's not technically a lie, but clearly you are hiding the truth. So I don't know what we can make of that. I never lie. Maybe this is another instance where there's one exception.
There's one exception, and it's kind of, I don't know. I kind of sometimes look at it, and some people don't like doing this either as parents, where the whole Santa Claus thing, they don't like lying about the fact that Santa Claus, like they're the ones giving the gifts, but it's the mystique of protecting the identity of like the spirit of Santa Claus. In this case, he has to lie to protect like the identity of Superman. Like there's a reason for the lie. We all have to say white lies to our kids in some cases to protect them. But it is a very interesting point. Like, no, you lie every time, every day.
I know. I truly don't think there are many off notes in this movie, but the poem,
bro. It's right here in my notes.
It's so bad. It's, and here's what breaks my heart. There's a point where when he drops her the first time and then he catches her and he's holding her, like they're face to face.
And it's beautiful.
You just cut from that to them returning to the rooftop. Done.
Yeah. Yep. I wrote, God, how did I put it? I still can't stand the flying with spoken lyrics. And I really honestly thought that scene would be beautiful with just John Williams music.
Yes.
Like just do the whole scene, have them, because you focus on their faces. You don't focus on that terrible narration.
But very shortly after that, we get the scene that we've already hit on a number of times. It's the scene that I think if you're talking about this performance, the duality of Clark and Superman, that moment when Clark shows up at Lois's apartment after this flight and date with Superman, and she leaves to go get ready to go out to eat with Clark. And he has that moment where he's standing there and he debates revealing himself. And he takes off the glasses and he stands up straight and his voice lowers and he says, Lois. And then he has these second thoughts and he reverts right back, slumps down, puts the glasses on, the voice goes up. You talk about a masterclass in acting, because it's one of those things where, yes, if you were to watch a scene of him as Clark and a scene of him as Superman, you could identify what he's doing, right? Oh, he's slouching.
Yes.
You can identify the pieces. But when you see him doing it, it's like a magic trick. It's crazy.
It's incredible. And I think that's where some of the other depictions have lost their way a little bit. Like, I don't understand. I love, there's so many parts of Superman and Lois that I love, but can seriously nobody see that that's Superman?
Well, I don't know how current you are, but have you, I don't want to spoil anything.
No, I'm 2 behind. I'm 2 or 3 behind.
Oh, well, because they basically do a version of this very scene.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah. I won't say the exact context, so I won't spoil too much, but essentially Tyler Hoechlin does exactly this, what Christopher Reeve does in the scene. I love Tyler Hoechlin. I think he's done a magnificent job.
Oh, he does it with Sam.
Yeah. The fact that you didn't remember might say a lot.
So, well, I mean, yeah.
There's not enough in the Superman and Lois. There's just not enough differentiation between the two characters. When he did it, Steph was like, all he did was like, she used the word smolder. Like he just smoldered. It's like he took off the glasses and he was just, I don't know, smoldered.
Yeah, he like tried to melt Sam with his eyes. It's interesting. So I had a circumstance. I mean, we laugh about this all the time. How really can a pair of glasses do this? I had a student. She's like a junior in high school. She's usually really put together, hair's done, doesn't wear glasses, comes to school. She looks like the way I would see her. We had a marching band night. Everybody, like, uniforms were off, and she had her glasses on. She's wearing a pair of sweatpants and kind of a tired t-shirt and like a sweater. I didn't recognize her. And I went like, and she goes, "It's me." And I was like, "You don't wear glasses." She goes, "Oh, I just was too tired with my contacts in." And I laughed because I went, "Oh my gosh. It's valid." Like he's hiding in plain sight. And I said that to Lana once, and she goes, "What does that mean?" I said, "You're not looking for him, so you don't think he's there."
Absolutely. And this was the thing. So the switch between characters that we zero in on that.
Correct.
This time, you know what really grabbed me was the nervousness. And he when he lets out that breath of like he's nervous.
Almost shaking.
Yeah. And that was when I say that this viewing, I just kind of got something else out of it. And where I had always felt this character was a little bit more removed, this time I saw more of that humanity. And it's not, he doesn't have a whole speech about it, but you see it in that performance where he's nervous. Like he's debating, sharing with her who he really is. And then he doesn't have the guts to go through with it. And you have to imagine the words of Jor-El are echoing in his ears at this point about you need to have a secret identity because they could get to you through her, or he's just nervous about being vulnerable. I mean, this was an idea that Smallville explored a lot of, Clark was taken to task for this a number of times. It's like, are you really not telling Lana because you're trying to protect her, or are you afraid of how she's going to react?
Scared? Yeah. What if she says you're a liar?
Yeah. But oh man, it's the best. It's such a good scene. It's such a good scene. I mean, not breaking any new ground here with that, but it's amazing.
No. How much deeper you want to go? We've been going at it for a while here.
I mean, I think we're at the point of the climax of the movie, no? I mean, I know we haven't really talked much about Lex.
Right.
And I don't know that I really have a ton to say. This is far from the interpretation of Lex in terms of backstory, motivation, and worldview that resonate with me the most. However, I think this is perfectly entertaining and fits the world of this movie. And I think for a movie that had so much ground to cover, I think there's just enough Lex here to present a problem and to kind of propel us into the final act of the movie with this whole real estate scheme to cause this earthquake that's going to cause the West Coast to fall into the ocean. And then all this worthless desert land will become valuable.
Oh, it is perfect. It's actually just campy enough and just scary enough, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how that was done well. Like, there were legit, there were like actual circumstances and risks and consequences. And I remember, what is a line he says? Are you so sick you like planning the deaths of innocent people? No, I like causing the deaths of innocent people. It's like, what? That got dark really fast.
I know. But it's great. And look, all the banter with Miss Tessmacher and Otis, it's amazing when Otis puts the robe on Lex when he's still in the water. Next time, wait until I'm out of the pool.
Oh my gosh. There's a lot. And I honestly, like, I don't know. I wasn't like looking for it, but I just don't remember. Miss Tessmacher. She's a good looking lady.
I had the same thought. I was
like, what? I'm like, how did I miss this?
I know. Valerie Perrine. I mean, like, absolutely stunning. I mean, really stunning.
And the wardrobe, I was like, oh, okay. All right. That they made a point there.
Yeah.
They were fun, like, and Ned Beatty's classic, and the whole, you want to see a long arm, and like that whole scene. I don't know if you caught it, but Valerie Perrine is like laughing in the ambulance when that's all happening.
Oh, yeah.
She's like giggling, and then when he leaves the seat and she has to drive, it's funny. And Ned Beatty is just so classic in this. He's just ridiculous.
Yeah. No, it's great. Again, I don't really have much analysis of this, but they're entertaining scenes, and I think they do what they need to. It always bugs me how quickly Lex figures out kryptonite. It's quite a leap, but all right, we'll go with it.
Well, and he's playing the game of like, well, wait. So he said it exploded. This happened. Let's look up this. Like what would? And I'm like, okay. Like, I know you're supposedly the what is it? The
greatest criminal mind of our time.
Criminal mind of our time.
Of our time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, what I do like though is that it's interesting because he's not quite the mad scientist of the pre-crisis comics.
Correct.
I mean, it's weird because he clearly has a scientific mind to a point, and and he knows enough to reprogram nuclear missiles and things like that, and his theory about kryptonite, but and he is underground and he's a wanted criminal, so he's not the public legitimate businessman, but it has shades of that. I feel like you could look at this as a bit of an early precursor to what we would get post-crisis.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell, like, I know it's kind of a weird slap in the face kind of right in front of you, but like the approach to the library, like he's a learned person. Like he's definitely knows a lot about a lot of things. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
As a fan of Cheers, I always love seeing Cliff Clavin show up in the missile thing. You know, John Ratzenberger is one of the firing people. He's like, the missile's out of control. I was like, oh, Cliff.
Oh, real quick with Miss Tessmacher. Of course, there's this whole business about Lex putting the kryptonite around Superman's neck and pushing him into the water.
And she saves him.
She saves him because one of the missiles is directed at Hackensack, New Jersey, which is where her mother lives. So this didn't make it into the special edition, but on the special edition disc, they also have additional deleted scenes. And I saw it. There's a really nice button with Miss Tessmacher when Superman saves her from being fed to Lex's pets.
To the babies.
Yeah, and he says, your mother sends her love. And so it's right before, presumably, when Superman would take Lex and Otis to prison. Yeah, right. It was a great button. But I guess you kind of needed that previous scene that's also on the deleted portion.
Yeah, I love that.
Of Otis
he lowers the whole rack of beef. I'm like, oh my God.
So you kind of need those the two scenes together. So but it was a nice button. I do kind of wish they had kept that.
Yeah, and I do like, again, it's the oddly. Oh, I never thought of this. Kevin Spacey in Superman Returns has that massive grand piano and he plays piano.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And there's a deleted scene in Superman the movie where Lex is playing piano.
Yes.
And I was like, it adds to the mystique and learnedness of like, he just knows a lot about a lot.
Yeah.
Like not many can just play piano. Yeah, it's fun.
Very true.
Trying to think if there's anything else about that side of it. The end of the movie is really where my brain goes to, just as far as before the timey-wiminess of it all. The Christopher Reeve cry and scream is still chilling to me.
Do you know? I agree, but you know what? Even before that, I think I've always been a little like traumatized is too strong of a word, but the dirt filling the car, yes. And her suffocating. Even from a little kid, it must have made some impression on me as a kid, and then even whenever I watch it now, I'm like, I don't like it.
Yeah, that and like drowning. That both those things really irk me when I see stuff like that in movies. I don't like it.
But no, when he and look, obviously before that, you got to give them credit because there's this whole action set piece of him going underground and actually stopping the earthquake in the Earth's core, and then there are all these aftershocks, and he saves the bus full of kids on the bridge and Jimmy, and he saves that village from the flood. But yeah, I know when he gets to Lois and he takes her out. I mean,
oh, dude, like it's the quiet. When he's like, no, when he's saying, he's like mouthing, no. And then like sound starts to come out. I'm like, oh my God. Like it's horrifying.
And when he's lowering her and like her head starts to move and he has a visible reaction. He's like, oh no.
My God. It's just great.
And that's why we were talking about this whole idea of defying Jor-El and what's the lesson here. But I don't know. I feel like maybe people have a different interpretation, but it's just like he cannot abide losing another person if there's something he can do.
And he's kind of broken. Like he kind of broke him. And he goes, okay, like, nope, I don't care. I got to fix it. I can't do this. I can't live with that in a world where I have to remember this.
I know. And so he does it. And I mean, we see this, the GIF online all the time of Superman turning his head from side to side as he's reliving all of these memories. But in my head, I guess I always remember him hearing Jor-El, you are forbidden to interfere. But he's hearing all these other things too about you were here for a reason.
Yes.
And maybe, I don't know. Maybe we have our answer because maybe that's it. Maybe he's torn between.
Is that the reason?
He's torn between the advice of the two fathers in his life.
Yeah.
One telling him not to act and the other one telling him you're here for a reason. And Clark's takeaway is, well, this is the reason I'm here. I can fix this.
Well, and it's a very different tone that Zack Snyder course corrected on with Kevin Costner saying, he's like, well, should I just let those kids die? And he goes, maybe. Like, it's almost like there's Jor-El and Pa in the same character. But in this version, it's Pa saying you're here for a reason, Jor-El saying don't interfere. It's like he's already broken. Now he's hearing both those voices.
This is yet another instance in this movie where there's a part of me that wants Superman to articulate what's going on in his head. But that's not what this movie is here to give us, and I respect that. And
I agree.
This now
gives you space.
This now gives us the infamous flying around the earth and reversing its spin. Now, I think among the fandom, I think the prevailing notion is that no, he did not literally rewind time. The idea is that that's a visual representation to show you him traveling backwards in time. The way it literally looks, it looks like the earth is spinning backwards and events are reversing, like you're rewinding a tape. That's the way it looks. But again, what I think critics of that interpretation continue to cite is just that it's a way to show how he's traveling through time. Just like in the comics in pre-crisis when he could pierce the time barrier and you would just see like the calendar pages flowing, passing by. The idea is that it's just showing how he's
I've never
traveling
saw
through
it.
time.
Oh, I've never thought of it that way.
Your interpretation has been he's just
Always turning
rewinding.
back time. Yes, he's rewinding things. And that's why the science didn't work out in my brain. I'm like, but it's still going to happen. Like, how is he going to stop that? Like, so let me follow this rabbit hole down with you then.
Yeah.
All right. So if he travels through time, the point that he travels back to has, in the lineage of the movie, this would be a really weird rabbit hole for me to go down to watching it slowly. But like, if he travels back to right before the crack gets to her car, did he already stop all the faults? Did he already lift all the faults up?
Well, because she talks about how when he fixes everything and he finds her, we'll talk more about that, but she talks about all these things that have happened to her. So it's like the events have still unfolded. It's just that she hasn't gotten crushed. So, historically, and I know I'm sure I said this in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Historically, my feeling has always been it makes more sense if he's merely rewinding, because if he were traveling through time, then there would be two of him.
And the crack would be still coming towards her car. Because that's what that's what kills her. Like, if he's just showing up, where's the crack?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you ever see him. He just shows up at Lois's car. You don't see him do anything else. I do think the better interpretation is that he travels through time, and when he shows up at Lois's car, there are two of him. Like the other him is taking care of the other saves. And the Superman who's traveled back in time is just getting to Lois earlier, while his past self is taking care of the other business.
That's so weird still, because that doesn't make sense.
You don't see that. So this could just be a plot hole, or this could be, again, I think an instance where they're just giving you space to interpret it. They're giving you space to argue and go, wait a second, how does that work? Because they're just saying, deal with the fact that it's fiction and it's sci-fi. Yeah. And that's the thing. And fans have debated this. I think that what's the point though? The point is that he defies Jor-El and he changes time. He changes the course of human history.
I'm going to fix it. Yeah.
And he saves Lois. I think the specific mechanics of it, I don't know. But yes, I guess like I said, I always gravitated towards reversing because you don't see the two of them. But if he's only reversing, it's like all the same stuff would happen.
Correct.
So that's why
he doesn't move the car.
Right.
It's not like he moves her or the car. He's like, he leaves her again there when her and Jimmy are going to walk away. Does the crack come and kill her dead car? Like, I don't know. I'm fine with it. I don't care about it. But I just, sometimes the answer side of me just wants to know, like, well, why is it okay?
I just don't think they had either the time or the budget or they cared to kind of show you, to show you the two of them occupying the same point. But I can push past all of that because, again, to the credit of Christopher Reeve, when he's at her car and he says, "Don't bother, I think it's dead," and he can't contain his smile, and she starts giving him a hard time, and she gets out of the car and she walks past him, and that sigh of relief of, it's so good.
It's normal again. Like, everything's okay. She's yelling at me again. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, it's Lois is here. Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. And then
our final scene, dropping them off at the prison, and we're all part of the warden thanking him, and don't thank me,
and
warden.
It's just done.
We're all part of the same.
It's kind of funny. I feel like it's just done. I never realized how abrupt the ending was.
You feel like you need one more scene in Metropolis?
I do.
Yeah.
Because it goes like Lois and Jimmy are okay. He goes, I got one more thing to do. He gets Lex and Otis. And then it's, everybody's safe thanks to you. And then it's like, fly and wave at the camera as you fly. And I'm like, I kind of wanted him to fly through Metropolis. I don't know why. I know.
Well, one last question about when he finds Lois, because you mentioned when he's like, no. And he looks up before the scream. He's looking up and he's saying no.
Yeah.
Is he just calling out to the universe, to our God? Here's an interesting question, right? He grows up in Smallville. He's going to church. He's going to church.
Does he believe in God?
Does he believe in God? Or in his
Jor-El.
world, Jor-El is like God, and he knows what Jor-El has forbidden him to do. Like, who is he crying out to in that moment, if anyone?
Yeah, I think it's his dad. Like, I think that he's saying no, because now he has to make the decision. Because he's never, think about it. I don't think he's ever had to deal with anybody dying yet. Like, as Superman, he couldn't save someone.
Yeah.
This is his first, oh gosh, I couldn't save them. He saved all the kids on the bus. He saved the dam. He saved all those people. Like, so now it's like, oh no. And I think he's yelling out to Jor-El saying, don't put me in this position. That's where I go.
And that's why this was far and away the better ending than what they originally had in mind. Because like I said, I read that script and it's just like, he just saves her.
Yeah.
You know, you need him to fail.
And be broken.
Yeah. So listen, this 2.5 hour extravaganza.
Yeah, baby.
I could not have enjoyed this more. And I really appreciate you coming on this ride with me and taking the time. I really enjoyed it. I worked a lot of stuff out. I enjoyed the conversation. Like, I feel so good about the movie. I know there are people listening to this who are probably like, yeah, this movie's great. Duh. But I'm like, guys, you're not going to believe this. Superman, the movie, like, it's like really good.
Yeah. Wow. How many episodes did it take? How many digging for Kryptonite episodes?
177 episodes. I'm like, this is so good. No, but
I could have told you this on episode 2.
Yeah, no, but the stuff that had held me back, I got past, and I appreciate it in a whole new way. And so, I couldn't have had a better time. I thank you so much, man.
Oh man, and you and I both know that everything we talk about, we love this character so much, but it's a journey. Like, you grow as you read, as you watch, as you rewatch, as you reread. Yeah, it's the opinions I have now are definitely not the same as 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a blast. Thanks, man.
Anything coming up at All Yeah Comics Skokie that you want to share with folks?
So actually something really cool that I think you'll appreciate, and anybody in the Chicagoland area. So I'm the point person for our first Comic-Con that we're running at my high school. So it's supporting the Maine West Fine Arts Boosters, and all the table rentals and admission goes directly to the art department at Maine West. So we've got it's in 3 weeks. We've got 14 or 15 vendors, all comics and toys and merch, and we've got 12 creators from the Chicagoland area that are going to be talking with people and doing sketches and selling books and just forming a really cool community in our area. So it's cool. We're excited.
Oh, that's awesome. No, I hope everything goes smoothly and it's a big success, and that sounds great. I hope people will check it out. Thank you, thanks, Bernie. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Keep tuning in. We're going to be going through each of the 4 Christopher Reeve movies. So make sure you come back next week for Superman 2. Primarily, we will be focusing on the theatrical cut, but inevitably we will touch upon the Donner cut as well, because I don't think you could have a conversation about Superman 2 without it. But man, Superman the movie, it made us believe a man can fly, and I couldn't have had a better time with this conversation. So thank you all. Come back next week. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.